Yeah, thank you very much, Don. So I thank you all for being with me and all the ones who will actually look at this video later on. And I want to thank you also, your parents and your grandparents and all your ancestors, because they followed what I call the um, the evolutionary imperative, meaning be fruitful and multiply. So if they hadn't followed this imperative, nobody of us would be here. So we have to honor this. And what does it mean? It means for most animals, plants, microorganisms, of course, bacteria and viruses, they can mutate and adapt to changes in the environment and also the threats, of course. We term this genetic adaptation. And interestingly, also our physical immune system, consisting of our immune cells, does the same. When it adapts to to recognize new viruses, for example, new bacteria, then it can also genetically adapt. So that's what I put down here. The physical immune system then consists of a multitude of different individual immune cells. It's very important. So we have to have a lot of different cells, a lot of, let's say, cellular individuality based on genetic differences during the ripening and maturing of immune cells. And in contrast to the genetic adaptation, humans are more adapting via creativity, technology, and social interaction. And I would like to term this cultural adaptation to threats and change in the outside world. So usually when people ask me what I mean by that, is right easy. We are at the end of an ice age, so the temperature is rising. The water might be rising a bit, but we are not going to wait at the ocean side at the shore and hope that we grow gills. That we adapt genetically to the rising water. We will, and of course, solve the problem for us by either building dams or moving inside the land or do something else. But so we do by social interaction or by technology, we adapt to the changes. So for this cultural adaptation, we have what I call the social or mental immune system, which on the social level consists of a multitude of different individual humans, pretty much like the multitude of different individual immune cells. We need many, many different humans to adapt efficiently to changes. And I will pose a rhetorical question here. It's just a question mark, and the question is quite simple. So what group of people do you think will most likely solve a problem, have an answer to a threat, this group or that group? Of course, the question is quite easily answered. It will be the right group. And John Dewey, a philosopher, once said, the free individuality, and we can easily see that the group on the right side has a lot more individuals, which is the source of art, is also the final source of creative development in time. And to put it into more mathematical terms, I did this in my book. I quote myself now, which one shouldn't do, but I like the sentence. The sum of all individuals multiplied by their degree of individuality is a level of innovative capacity of a society. So in other words, if you want to overcome a society, if you want to dominate a society, you don't want to have individuals. You want to have people on the left top, pretty much like Aldous Huxley produced them in his dystopia in bottles in large masses. So anyway, individuality, where does it come from? Again, John Dewey said we do not learn from experience, but from reflecting on experience, which is a very wise sentence. And there was recently a publication in by two scientists. I think they're from Scandinavia, the cognitive philosophy of reflection. They say the reflective mind is considered to include decision making, the mental simulation, the ability of making comparisons, reasoning, as well as hypothetical thinking. So a lot of reflection, essentially, in many, many different ways. And this is the basis of developing individuality. It's a conscious process in a way. And then I turned to a Nobel Prize that was given in 2020 and 2002 for the psychologist Daniel Kahneman. He got it for human judgment and decision making under uncertainty, which requires exactly these abilities. And he told us, or his research told us, that we have essentially two systems, two mental systems, how we can react with the environment. And he published that in a very famous book, Thinking Fast, Thinking Slow. And this is actually original. I read it in 2011, and that was essentially the basis of a lot of research I've done in the last 10 years. And I will come to what the question was I was trying to answer. But first, let's see at these two systems. The fast thinking system we call system 1. The slow thinking system we call system 2. And they to differentiate these two systems, I show you a couple of characteristics. So, for example, system 2 is an unconscious system. It's stereotyped behavioral and thought patterns, versus system 2, which is conscious and reflective thought, consists of reflective thoughts. Then it's system 1 is learned, but also instinctive behavior. And very important to understand that we are also acting on impulse. So if somebody hits you and you hit them right back at the very second, then it's system 1, and the judge will probably be more kind to you. But if you wait 5 minutes, then he will think that you maybe have thought about it, and then it's an intentional action, and then it's quite more heavily much more difficult for you to get out of to avoid jail maybe. So it's new behavior and planned action. System 2 also trains system 1. So if you want to change your behavior, you have to essentially activate system 2 and do this repetitively. And once you have done it for a while, then this new system 2 behavior becomes essentially system 1 behavior. And that has a huge advantage because system 1 doesn't require mental energy. In contrast, system 2 requires mental energy and is subject what we call in science ego depletion. Meaning, and we all experience that every day. So if I work hard, doing a lot of thinking during the day, in the evening, I feel strongly ego depleted, meaning I don't like to engage system 2 so much, and refer to stereotyped behavior, does do only things that don't are not very stressful. And I remember when I read emails in the evening, I taught myself not to answer them under system 1, but wait for an good overnight sleep. And in the morning, when system 2 energy is restored, I'm more able to make the right judgments, sending the email out or in the wording I had composed the evening before or not. And I can tell you more than once, I was very happy that I have waited. But anyway, this is system 1 and system 2. System 1, because it doesn't require energy, is always active, and that's good. But system 2 needs to be activated. It's not active. It's only active when we feel somehow the situation warrants a new behavior, some thinking, and then we can activate it. And it's kind of an energy conserving mechanism, I guess. It's so system 1 is our default state of being, and system 2, the real thinking, needs to be activated. And if you look at it very carefully, system 1 is actually not thinking at all. I mean, if you look at all the characteristics, it's not really thinking. So in my opinion, it's a misnomer, and it's maybe a good title, but it's not fast thinking, it's just fast action. Whereas a slow thinking, a system 2, is new, creative, and what I also call lateral thinking. Lateral thinking in Germany is Querdenken, and that's actually right-wing kind of doing. It's not accepted in our society anymore since 2020. But anyway, Some people call system 1 also the zombie mode. And when I actually wrote the book, the title was the zombie apocalypse, because if people are not able to engage in system 2, and they are constantly in system 1 mode, then they follow essentially a path that is not very nice if you are on the other side of the fence. So it's a very difficult situation. And why it's called a zombie mode? It's not zombie, of course, like in Hollywood. It has something to do with research on consciousness. And so two scientists, actually another Nobel Prize winner here, Francis Crick, who got the Nobel Prize for discovering how our genetic system works, the DNA. He wrote a paper a year after the Nobel Prize for Kahneman in Nature Neuroscience, together with his colleague Christof Koch. The title of the paper was "A Framework for Consciousness," and there's actually one sentence in there. But you're right, it seems to be a great evolutionary advantage to have zombie modes that respond rapidly in a stereotyped manner. That's system 1, together with a slightly slower system that allows time for thinking and planning and more complex behavior, system 2. So both are a product of evolution, but they work together. So it's good to have both. But I will show you if you want to overcome or take over a society, you have to make sure that system 2 is not working. What I want to explain now is that when in 2011, when I wrote Kahneman's book, at that time, it was not clear what is actually the energy he's talking about. What is the energy that system 1 doesn't require and which is necessary for system 2 function? And since then, I had an idea, and I was studying everything I could in the last 10 years, the following 10 years, to realize what the system 2 energy might be. It is the basic concept of my book, The Exhausted Brain, and became also a very important part of the indoctrinated brain, because I think I have discovered where system 2 energy comes from, what it consists of, and I actually just submitted a paper to Frontiers in Behavioral Neuroscience, where I explain what the system 2 energy might be. It's under review, and I'm not sure it will ever be published, but at least I made an attempt to get it published. Anyway, I will show you what the energy system is, in my opinion, and what the consequences are if this system doesn't work. It's about thinking and planning more complex behavior, and that's usually a function of our frontal brain.